Amara, please, don't walk away from me again. The sound of Ethan Vale's voice cracked in a way no one in that glittering ballroom had ever heard before. His broad shoulders, usually squared in dominance, hunched as if carrying unbearable weight. His jaw trembled, his icy blue eyes glossed with tears. Before the stunned crowd of investors and photographers, the man everyone feared, the untouchable CEO, dropped to his knees. But Amara Johnson did not falter. Clad in a midnight gown that shimmered like stars against her dark skin, she clutched her child's tiny hand and stared down at him, eyes burning with all the wounds he had carved into her. "You humiliated me once, Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady enough to slice through the silence. "I will never forget that." The crowd held its breath. Cameras flashed. A man on his knees, a woman standing tall. But this moment of reckoning was months away. Before she was a model commanding rooms, Amara was only a girl in a too-large uniform, standing in the vast kitchen of Ethan Vale's mansion, with her hands trembling around a silver tray. The clock ticked in the silence. She had polished every glass twice, set every napkin in perfect folds, and yet the dread clawed at her ribs. She knew one mistake, one misplaced spoon, would bring his fury. The double doors creaked open. Ethan entered like a storm. 6'3", tailored suit sculpted to his frame, blonde hair slicked back to expose his chiseled features. His eyes, pale and merciless, swept across the table like searchlights. Every servant stiffened. Amara did too. "Who set this table?" His voice was smooth but dangerous. Amara swallowed. I did, sir." He stepped closer. The others pretended to vanish, scurrying out the back, leaving her alone in the spotlight of his gaze. Ethan's finger traced the edge of a wine glass, stopped the tau, and flicked the spoon beside it a fraction of an inch. "Do you know what I see when I look at this?" His tone was clinical, dissecting. Amara's heart thudded. A mistake." His lip curled. "Sloppiness. Carelessness. I don't tolerate either in my house." Her throat tightened. She had been up since dawn, scrubbing floors, ironing linens, running up and down staircases until her legs burned. Still, she bowed her head. "Yes, sir. It won't happen again." "See that it doesn't." He turned away, dismissing her existence as if she were nothing more than dust. Amara held her breath until he was gone. Then, quietly, she let one tear fall, wiping it away before anyone could see. Later, alone in her small maid's room, tucked deep in the west wing, she sat on the narrow bed clutching the one photograph she'd brought from home, herself at 17, smiling on a makeshift runway at her high school talent show. She had dreamed of New York lights, of walking catwalks in Paris, of becoming someone who could never be overlooked. Now she served meals to a man who could barely meet her eyes without tearing her down. Still, she whispered to the photo, "One day, I'll make it." Outside her window, the city lights flickered like promises waiting to be claimed. Meanwhile, Ethan retreated to his study, where dark mahogany shelves and leather-bound books surrounded him like a fortress. He poured a glass of whiskey, staring at the amber liquid, but the vision of Amara's trembling hands clung to him. Why had her eyes lingered? Why did her voice echo after silence? He shook his head, irritated with himself. He was a man of control, of discipline. He had no room for softness. Certainly not for the fragile hope in the eyes of a 20-year-old maid. And yet, that night, for the first time in years, Ethan Vale could not sleep. The days blurred with their cruel rhythm, his sharp commands, her quiet endurance. But something invisible had begun to shift between them. His gaze lingered too long when she passed. Her hands trembled less when he entered the room, her spine straightening as if defying the weight of his disapproval. Neither spoke of it. Neither dared. Until the night the accident happened. Amara had finished her shift late. Her hair, damp from the shower, clung to her shoulders as she tiptoed back toward her room, wrapped in a towel. She thought the mansion's halls would be empty, but as she turned a corner, she froze. Ethan stood at the other end of the corridor, unbuttoning his cufflinks. His gaze collided with hers. For a breathless moment, silence stretched, heavy and dangerous. Amara's heart thundered. His eyes roamed. not cruel, not cold, but something darker, hungrier. She clutched the towel tighter against her chest, heat rushing to her cheeks. I'm sorry, sir, she stammered, starting to step back. But Ethan didn't move. He only stared, his jaw tense, his breathing shallow. For once, the man who controlled every detail seemed utterly undone. And in that fragile instant, the air between them changed forever. "You call this service?" The crystal glass shattered against the marble floor, shards spinning across the white surface like angry sparks. Amara flinched, her hands tightening on the silver tray she carried. Ethan's voice thundered through the dining hall, his glare pinning her in place. The other staff froze, afraid to breathe. Ethan rose from his chair, tall and immovable in his tailored suit, the scent of expensive cologne following him like a warning. His pale blue eyes burned into Amara's. "I told you, room temperature, not chilled. Is that so difficult to understand?" I'm sorry, sir." Her voice cracked, barely audible. "I'll fix it right away." "Sorry doesn't pour the glass correctly, does it?" His tone was cold, precise, as if her mistake were a personal insult. Her cheeks flushed hot. She lowered her gaze, fighting the sting in her eyes. She wanted to scream that she had worked 14 hours without pause, that she hadn't eaten since dawn, that one glass of wine didn't deserve this fury. But her lips stayed sealed. Ethan waved her away with disgust. "Get out of my sight before you waste any more of my time." Amara turned quickly, clutching the tray, holding back tears until she was safely beyond the dining hall doors. Inside the pantry, she pressed her back against the wall, breathing hard. Her reflection glimmered faintly in the polished steel of the refrigerator, damp curls sticking to her forehead, skin glowing with sweat, eyes red-rimmed. She hated how small he made her feel. And yet, why did her stomach tighten not only with anger, but with something else, something she couldn't name? She despised the way her body betrayed her, trembling not just from fear, but from the memory of his eyes on her last night in the hallway. That look hadn't been cold, it had been something else entirely. She shook her head. "No," she whispered to herself. "Don't be stupid. Don't." Later that night, she escaped to her little room, her one safe corner of the mansion. On her desk lay a cheap notebook filled with sketches, dresses, gowns, even rough attempts at heels. They were clumsy drawings, but they carried her dream. She picked up her pencil, her hand steadying as she traced lines of fabric draping across imagined shoulders. Modeling wasn't just about looks. It was about vision, courage, claiming a place in the world that said, "See me." Someday, she thought, someday I'll walk into a room and no one will dismiss me. Not him, not anyone. Across the mansion, Ethan stared at his reflection in his study window, his jaw clenched as he loosened his tie, his thoughts restless. He could still see Amara's face when he shouted at her. The way her lips pressed together, holding back tears, her dignity cracking but not shattering. Why did it bother him? He had berated dozens of employees over the years, dismissed countless mistakes without another thought. But her... Ethan poured himself another glass of whiskey, his hand tightening around it. He told himself it was irritation, that he couldn't afford incompetence in his home. But the truth slipped through in flashes, the glint of her eyes when she defied his stare, the softness of her voice when she whispered apologies, the way her presence filled the empty silence of his halls. It unnerved him, and Ethan Vale did not like being unnerved. The following morning, Amara carried out her duties with unusual care, every movement deliberate. She polished until her hands ached, arranged flowers until the scent of roses clung to her skin, checked every glass 3 times before setting it down. Still, when Ethan entered the breakfast hall, she felt her breath catch. His gaze flickered over her, sharp and assessing, then lingered just a second too long. "Better," he said curtly, seating himself at the table, but his voice lacked the venom of the night before. Amara lowered her eyes quickly, hiding the strange flutter in her chest. Days stretched into weeks. The air between them grew thick with tension neither could name. Ethan's reprimands became shorter, his silences longer. Amara's eyes lifted to meet his more often, though she always looked away first. And always, lingering beneath the surface, was the memory of that night in the corridor. Her towel clutched tight, his stare burning through the dim hall, their silence charged with unspoken hunger. It haunted them both. One evening, when the house was quiet and the staff retired, Amara slipped into the library to dust. The room smelled of leather and old paper, the shelves stretching higher than she could reach. She stood on a small ladder, humming softly as she worked, the heat of her uniform brushing her thighs. The door opened. She turned, startled, and nearly lost her balance. Ethan stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked at her differently now, his usual cold mask absent. His eyes swept over her figure, not with disdain, but with an intensity that made her pulse race. For a long, dangerous moment, neither spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence, his voice low and rough. "You hum when you work." Amara blinked, confused. I'm sorry, sir." "Don't apologize," he said, stepping closer. "It suits you." Her breath caught. The ladder wobbled slightly beneath her feet. His hand reached out, steadying it, steadying her. For a heartbeat, his fingers brushed her ankle, and the touch sent fire coursing through her veins. She looked down at him, their eyes locking. And for the first time, Ethan Vale wasn't her master. He was a man staring at her, as if he couldn't look away. "Why are you looking at me like that?" The words slipped out before Amara could stop them. Her voice was barely above a whisper, trembling in the quiet library. Ethan's hand still rested lightly against the ladder, steadying her. His gaze held hers, unblinking, his blue eyes sharp but no longer cold. They were searching, hungry. He tilted his head slightly. "Because you don't even realize what you are." Her pulse thudded in her ears. "A maid?" she said bitterly, clutching the feather duster tighter. His lips curved, not into a smile, but something sharper, more dangerous. "No, something more." The tension between them became unbearable in the days that followed. Every encounter burned with the memory of that moment in the library. When he passed her in the hall, his shoulder brushed hers just enough to send a shiver down her spine. When she poured his coffee, she felt his eyes linger too long on her hands. When he spoke her name, Amara, in that deep, commanding tone, the sound followed her long after he left the room. And yet, the cruelty didn't stop. One evening, with guests dining in the hall, Amara accidentally dropped a fork. The clang echoed like a gunshot. Ethan's jaw tightened, his glare slicing into her. "Unacceptable," he snapped, his voice carrying across the table of suited executives. "I've said it before. Perfection is not optional in this house." Laughter rippled from one of the guests, who sneered at her as if she were a clumsy child. Amara bent quickly to pick up the fork, her cheeks burning. She kept her head low, swallowing the humiliation, forcing her trembling hands to stay steady as she replaced the cutlery. But her eyes glistened with unshed tears. After the guests left, Amara retreated to her room. She shut the door, slid down against it, and pressed her hands to her face. How could she still ache for the same man who tore her dignity apart? It was madness. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, telling herself she would quit. She would leave the mansion, find another job, chase her dreams without this torment. But the city was expensive, modeling was brutal to break into, and she had nowhere else to go. So she stayed. Meanwhile, Ethan paced in his study, restless. His conscience warred with itself. Why had he humiliated her in front of his guests? It had been a minor mistake, easily ignored. Yet the words had flown from his lips before he could stop them. Control was his armor, and humiliation was the weapon he had always wielded to maintain it. But when he saw the glimmer of tears in Amara's eyes, something inside him twisted. A pang of regret. A pang he tried, and failed, to drown in whiskey. The breaking point came late one night. Amara finished her chores and returned to her small room. She set her uniform aside, showered, and stepped out wrapped in a towel. Her hair clung in damp curls to her shoulders, her ski, and glistening with beads of water. She padded softly down the corridor toward her room. Then she froze. Ethan stood at the far end of the hallway. His suit jacket hung loose over one arm, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. The light from a nearby sconce illuminated his features. Sharp jaw, piercing eyes, lips slightly parted as if caught mid-breath. For a moment, neither moved. Amara clutched her towel tighter. I didn't know anyone was out here." Ethan didn't answer. His gaze swept over her. Not cruel, not mocking, but raw. The air thickened with something unspoken, something dangerous. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She should have run, should have turned away. Instead, she stood rooted, caught in his stare. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, gravelly. "You're beautiful." Her throat constricted. No one had ever said the word to her like that, not as a compliment tossed lightly, but as a truth, heavy and undeniable. Amara shook her head quickly. Don't say that." "Why not?" he asked, stepping closer. His tone carried no command this time, only wonder. "Because I know what you think of me." Her voice broke. "I'm just a clumsy maid to you. A nuisance." Ethan stopped a foot away, his breath mingling with hers in the stillness. "Is that what you believe?" Her eyes brimmed with tears she tried to hide. "You make me believe it." His jaw tightened, his hand lifting as if to touch her face, then stopping, trembling in the space between them. Amara's heart pounded. She should have stepped back. Instead, she whispered, "Please, don't." But neither of them moved. The silence stretched, charged, until it felt like the mansion itself was holding its breath. And in that moment, Amara realized something terrifying. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was afraid of herself, afraid of how much she wanted him. Her back pressed against the cool wall of the corridor, towel clutched desperately to her chest. Ethan stood so close that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell the faint burn of whiskey on his breath, and hear the uneven rhythm of his heartbeat. "Amara," he murmured, her name softer than she had ever heard it, almost reverent. "I shouldn't want this." Her lips trembled. "Then don't." But when his hand finally touched her cheek, the resolve in her voice crumbled. The brush of his thumb was gentle, hesitant, as if he were afraid she might shatter. She closed her eyes, torn between retreat and surrender, her body betraying her with a shiver that gave him the answer he sought. His mouth met hers before she could think. The kiss was fierce, hungry, yet laced with restraint, as if he had been holding back for too long. Her towel slipped under his hand, forgotten, as his arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her against him. For the first time, Ethan Vale's walls collapsed, and the man who demanded perfection lost all control. Amara gasped against his lips, her hands pushing weakly at his chest, but the strength to resist bled away. She wanted to be angry, to remind herself of every cruel word he had thrown at her. Instead, she melted, caught in the gravity of him, in the impossible way her body answered his. "Ethan," she whispered, breaking from his mouth, her eyes wide, torn between fear and desire. "This is wrong." His gaze searched hers, intense and vulnerable all at once. "Tell me to stop," he rasped, "and I will." But she didn't. Her silence was its own permission. They stumbled together into his bedroom, the city lights painting the walls in silver and shadow. Clothes fell in frantic haste, breath mingled with gasps and soft cries. For Amara, every touch was a first. The terrifying surrender of innocence, the dizzying discovery of desire. For Ethan, it was something deeper than he expected. Not conquest, but release. A breaky thing of chains he hadn't known he carried. Their passion burned through the night, until exhaustion finally drew them into silence. Morning came cruelly. Sunlight spilled across tangled sheets, illuminating Amara's bare shoulder where it rested against Ethan's chest. Her lashes fluttered as she stirred, a soft smile curving her lips before memory sharpened, and her heart leapt with fragile hope. Last night had changed everything. It had to. Carefully, she lifted her head, studying the man beside her. His jawline was sharp even in sleep, his hand resting near hers, veins visible beneath the skin. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked peaceful, human. Her chest swelled with something dangerous, the belief that maybe she mattered to him. But the moment shattered when his eyes opened. Ethan blinked, saw her, and the warmth of night vanished behind his familiar mask. His body tensed. He sat up, swinging his legs out of bed, his voice cold once more. "You should get dressed." Amara froze. "What?" "Last night." He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding her gaze. "It was a mistake. It won't happen again." The words slammed into her like a physical blow. "A mistake?" she repeated, her voice cracking. He buttoned his shirt briskly. back still turned to her. Don't make this into something it wasn't. Her chest burned, tears flooding her eyes. She clutched the sheet around her, shaking her head. Ethan, you can't just... He cut her off, sharp and final. Enough, Amara. Get yourself together and return to your duties. And just like that, the fortress was rebuilt, the walls higher than ever. Amara sat in the bed they had shared, heart splintering. The night she thought had bound them together had meant nothing to him. She had given him her innocence, her trust, and in return, he handed her humiliation. But she didn't yet know the cruelest wound was still to come. Weeks later, her body began to change. The nausea, the fatigue, the quiet flutter she felt deep inside her belly. Undeniable signs of life. Pregnancy. Her hands shook as she held the test in her small bathroom, tears streaking down her cheeks. Fear, disbelief, and a fragile spark of hope churned within her. She thought of Ethan, of the man who had held her like she was more than a servant, who had kissed her as if she were the only woman alive. Maybe he would soften. Maybe he would finally see her. But when she tried to tell him, trembling in his study with the words on her lips, he interrupted her before she could finish. "Don't waste my time," he said, icy. "If you're pregnant, it isn't mine. You've had your fun elsewhere, I'm sure." Her heart dropped. "How can you say that?" "Because I know women like you," he replied, leaning back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "You think you can trap a man with lies, but I'm not a fool." It felt like her chest had been ripped open. Her voice broke into a sob. "You're the only man I've ever been with." But he didn't believe her. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, his gaze colder than ever. "Pack your things. You're finished here." That night, Amara left the mansion for the last time. She carried only a suitcase, her broken heart, and the fragile life growing inside her. She stepped into the city's neon-lit streets, rain soaking her thin coat, fear gnawing at her. But somewhere beneath it, a flicker of resolve sparked. If Ethan Vale believed she was nothing, she would prove him wrong. Rain lashed against the bus window as Amara sat with her suitcase clutched to her chest. Her body felt hollow, numb. Only the faint flutter in her belly reminded her that she wasn't completely alone. Her heart replayed his words over and over. "If you're pregnant, it isn't mine." Each repetition cut deeper than the last. She had left with no money, no plan, no place to stay. Just the broken pieces of a dream and the determination not to let him destroy her completely. The weeks that followed were brutal. Amara slept on a friend's worn couch, worked double shifts in dingy diners, and pinched every dollar until it screamed. Some nights, she went to bed hungry just to save enough for a doctor's visit. But her belly grew, her strength grew with it. And one evening, in a cramped bathroom with peeling wallpaper, she looked in the mirror and didn't see the humiliated maid anymore. She saw a woman with fire in her eyes, holding on to something bigger than herself. The dream of modeling, the dream she had whispered into her high school photo, still lived in her, and she would not let Ethan Vale's cruelty steal it. Months passed. The city that once towered over her became a battleground she began to conquer. She auditioned for small shows, posed for struggling photographers, and walked runways in basements and community halls. Every rejection fueled her grit. Her beauty could not be ignored, nor could her resilience. By the time her son was born, a baby boy with pale blue eyes so hauntingly familiar she couldn't look away without tears, Amara's name had begun to circulate. Within 2 years, Amara Johnson became a rising star in the fashion world. Her face graced magazine covers, her walk owned catwalks, her presence lit up rooms. The girl who once polished silver for a man who despised her now commanded cameras and applause. And everywhere she went, she carried her son, the proof of her endurance, the reason she never gave up. Meanwhile, Ethan Vale thrived in business, but found no peace. His empire expanded, his wealth multiplied, his reputation grew colder, sharper. But at night, when the mansion fell silent, memories plagued him. The softness of her lips, the tremble in her voice when she whispered, "Yo, you're the only man I've ever been with." The way her eyes had burned when he accused her of betrayal. For the first time in years, doubt gnawed at him. Had he been wrong? The answer came crashing into his world one fateful afternoon. Ethan's company had been struggling with its public image, desperate to refresh its brand. His marketing team buzzed with excitement, announcing they had secured a new ambassador, the perfect face to represent their future. On the day of the reveal, Ethan entered the glass-walled boardroom. Executives clinked glasses, photographers adjusted their cameras, the tension electric. Then the doors opened, and Amara Johnson walked in. She was radiant, dressed in a sleek white gown that flowed like liquid light, her skin glowing under the flash of bulbs. Her chin lifted, her eyes steady. She walked as if she owned the world. But Ethan's gaze locked on the small boy walking beside her, his tiny hand wrapped in hers. The child's hair was dark like Amara's, but his eyes, those pale, piercing blue eyes, were Ethan's. The room erupted in applause, but Ethan heard nothing. His world narrowed to the sight of the woman he had destroyed, now untouchable, and the son he had denied. The press conference began. Reporters clamored with questions, flashes popping like fireworks. Amara answered with grace, her voice calm and commanding. She didn't falter once. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her. The humiliated maid was gone. Before him stood a queen. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped to the podium, his hands trembling for the first time in his career. His voice, usually precise and unshakable, faltered. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, clearing his throat, "today we welcome the future of Vale Enterprises, a woman whose strength, resilience, and brilliance embody everything we strive for." His eyes flicked to Amara, and for a second the mask cracked. His gaze softened, guilt and longing spilling through. "Amara John, son." The applause roared. Cameras clicked furiously, but Amara did not smile at him. Not once. That night, when the event ended and the crowd dispersed, Ethan found her in the hallway, her son perched on her hip. "Amara," he said, his voice hoarse. She turned slowly, her eyes cold as glass. "Don't. You've said enough to me for one lifetime." He stepped closer, desperate. "Please, let me explain." Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "Explain? You called me a liar. You threw me out like garbage. And now you see my face on magazines and suddenly you care?" Her son stirred in her arms, his sleepy eyes opening. Ethan's chest constricted at the sight. His son. His blood. "Amara, I was wrong," Ethan whispered, voice breaking. "God, I was so wrong." For the first time in years, Ethan Vale, the man no one dared cross, looked utterly undone. The hallway was silent except for the soft hum of the building's air conditioning. Amara adjusted her son on her hip, her gaze locked on Ethan's trembling frame. He had always towered over her, commanding, cold, unshakable, but now he looked human. "Wrong?" she repeated, her voice sharp with disbelief. "You didn't just make a mistake, Ethan, you shattered me. Do you have any idea what I went through after you threw me out?" Her son stirred, small hands gripping her dress. Ethan's eyes followed the movement, pain carving itself into his features. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he said, stepping closer, his voice raw. "But let me make this right. Let me be there for him." His eyes flicked to the boy. "For you." Amara's laugh was bitter, echoing in the hallway. "Now? Now that the cameras are watching? Now that I don't need you anymore?" Ethan reached out, his hand trembling. For the first time in his life, the mighty Ethan Vale seemed to beg. "Amara, please. I can't undo what I said. But I'll spend every day of my life proving to you that I was wrong." She stepped back, her son's small head resting against her shoulder. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You accused me of sleeping with other men. Do you know what that did to me? Do you know how much I loved you?" The words hit him like a blade. His jaw tightened, his eyes glassy. "I was a fool," he said hoarsely, "blinded by my pride, by the fear of being vulnerable. I punished you for giving me something pure, and I've hated myself every day since." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Amara stared at him, torn between the ache in her chest and the fury that still burned hot. Finally, she shook her head. "It's not that simple, Ethan. You can't just walk back into my life because you suddenly feel regret. I built myself from the ground up. I raised my son alone. We don't need you. Her son looked up at Ethan then, his blue eyes wide, curious. Ethan's heart clenched. That gaze, his gaze, mirrored back at him. "Maybe you don't," Ethan whispered, voice breaking. "But I need you. Both of you." Weeks passed, and Ethan didn't give up. He showed up to Amara's shows, sitting quietly in the back, never demanding her attention, but always present. He sent flowers, not extravagant bouquets, but small, thoughtful ones with handwritten notes. "I'm sorry. I see you now. Please let me try." He donated to charities for single mothers, quietly, anonymously, but she knew. He was changing, not with money, not with power, but with humility. And yet, every time he came near, Amara's walls rose higher. Then came the breaking point, a gala, glittering with chandeliers and velvet gowns. Amara was the star of the evening, her beauty dazzling under the lights. Ethan was there too, standing at a distance, watching her as if she were the only person in the room. The press circled, reporters asking questions, cameras flashing. One bold journalist leaned forward, voice sharp. "Amara, is it true the father of your child abandoned you, that you've raised him alone without support?" The room went silent. Amara froze, the microphone trembling in her hand. Her son was backstage with a nanny, but his existence hung heavy in the air. Before she could answer, Ethan stepped forward. "Yes," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "It's true." Gasps rippled across the crowd. The cameras swung toward him. "I abandoned them," Ethan said, his voice cracking but steady. "I humiliated the woman who gave me her heart, and I denied my own son. It was the greatest mistake of my life, and I will never stop asking for their forgiveness." The gala exploded in murmurs, reporters scribbling furiously. Ethan didn't care. He turned, looking only at Amara, his eyes wet. "Amara Johnson," he said, his voice trembling but strong. "I love you. I always have. And if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of you. And of him." For the first time, the mighty Ethan Vale bowed his head, humbling himself before the world. Amara's heart thundered in her chest. The man who once tore her apart now stood broken before her, vulnerable, repentant, his walls shattered. Her lips parted, but no words came. The cameras flashed, the world holding its breath, waiting for her answer. The silence in the gala hall felt heavy, like the weight of centuries pressing down. All eyes were fixed on Amara. She stood tall, her sequined gown glittering under the chandeliers, her breath caught between fury and forgiveness. The microphone in her hand trembled, though her posture remained regal. Ethan stayed bowed before her, his broad shoulders hunched, his pride stripped away. For once the man known for icy commands and cutting words had nothing left but raw humanity. "Stand up," Amara finally said, her voice steady but low. He lifted his head slowly, his blue eyes glistening. The room held its breath. "You think an apology fixes it?" she asked, her tone sharp as glass. "You think one speech erases the nights I cried myself to sleep, terrified of raising a child alone? You think it erases the way you humiliated me, Ethan?" Every syllable hit like a lash, but Ethan didn't flinch. His gaze stayed locked on hers. "No," he said softly. "It doesn't erase it. Nothing ever will. But I'll never stop trying to make it right." Her chest tightened. Part of her wanted to scream, to throw his words back in his face, but another part, the part that remembered the way he once looked at her, not with cruelty but with awe, the night he first touched her, whispered that maybe he was telling the truth. She inhaled, steadying herself. "You hurt me," she said, her voice dropping. "You broke me in ways you'll never fully understand. But my son? He deserves better than a ghost of a father. If you want to be in his life, Ethan, you will have to earn it. Slowly, patiently. And not for me. For him." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Ethan's lips parted, his eyes filling again, but he nodded. "I'll earn it, whatever it takes." Months passed, and Ethan proved his words weren't empty. He visited often, never barging into Amara's world, but slipping into it gently. He read bedtime stories to their son, his deep voice softening as the little boy drifted into sleep. He cooked meals, clumsy at first, burning toast, but learning. He stood at the edges of Amara's photo shoots, quietly watching, not with control, but with admiration. The tabloids followed their every move, but Ethan no longer cared about headlines. His only focus was them. Amara resisted at first, cautious, her walls high. But slowly she began to see the changes. His anger was gone, his arrogance stripped away. What remained was a man, imperfect, but honest. A man who finally saw her not as a servant, not as a conquest, but as his equal. One evening, as the city lights glimmer, beyond her apartment window, Ethan knelt again. This time there were no cameras, no crowd, no stage, just Amara, their son, and the quiet hum of life around them. He held out a simple ring, his hands trembling. "Amara Johnson," he whispered, "I don't deserve you. But I love you. Marry me, not because I'm rich, not because I'm Ethan Vale the CEO, but because I am yours, entirely, always." Her son toddled between them then, small hands touching the box, his innocent eyes looking up at her. Tears filled Amara's eyes. For months she had waited, tested him, held her ground, and now, in this moment, she saw it. The truth. He had changed. Her lips curved into a trembling smile. "Yes," she whispered. Ethan broke, tears spilling freely as he pulled them both into his arms. The story didn't end with fireworks or headlines. It ended with quiet mornings of pancakes in a sunlit kitchen, with laughter echoing through a home once filled with silence, with Amara walking red carpets, her son on one side, Ethan on the other, not as master and servant, not as boss and waitress, but as a family. The man once feared for his cruelty became known for his gentleness. The girl once humiliated became the woman who rebuilt her life and her heart. And together, they proved that even the deepest wounds can heal, not through power, not through wealth, but through humility, forgiveness, and love.